This episode of New Politics was released on the 2nd of August, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
Hello to our audience and hello to you, David.
Hello, Eddie. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm just glad that I'm over 16 and I've already set up my YouTube account, because pretty soon, if you're under 16, you won't be able to do that.
Governments who overextend their reach tend to snap back badly, I think. It's as someone who does a bit of teaching, one-on-one teaching, YouTube is an excellent resource. And instead of teaching people how to use it properly, banning it defeats me.
And this week we're discussing the new AUKUS treaty, which doesn't include the US part of the deal. That's all pretty strange. We'll also be looking at the events in Parliament this week. The momentum to recognise Palestine as a state, is it really going to happen? And how do we remove a politician who ends up in jail? That's the big question of the week. So all of this is coming up in this great big episode of New Politics.
And I can't wait.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
Australia and the UK have just signed a 50-year treaty to lock in the AUKUS submarine deal. It's known as the Geelong Treaty. And Defence Minister Richard Marles has called it the most significant treaties ever made between Australia and the UK. But it's a treaty within a treaty, and it's weird that the United States isn't a part of this treaty. The United States is currently reviewing its role within the original AUKUS agreement and seeing how it fits in with its America First policy. Here's what Richard Marles had to say about this.
It is the natural evolution of what we've agreed. It really, in terms of what's in the treaty, it is putting into treaty form what had already been agreed between our two countries. But it also it comes and sits under the trilateral treaty that was signed between our three countries in August of last year. I think the way to look at this is another step forward down the AUKUS path. It's another demonstration of the fact that AUKUS is happening.
And David, I listened closely to all of this. It's not clear what any of this means. Australia has already spent $1.6 billion with the United States, and we've got nothing to show for that and probably never will. And now we're signing on with the UK to send more money for another batch of submarines that we'll probably never get. And this treaty is supposed to enable cooperation on designing, building and operating the SSN AUKUS submarines, and that's a new class of submarines. And we're also going to pay the UK to upgrade their shipbuilding yards. And we're also doing that with the United States. And under this treaty, construction is also going to take place in South Australia for the delivery of submarines at some point in the 2040, so that's almost 20 years away. And whether any of this is true or not is a totally different question, but the Australian government decided that it wasn't good enough just to send money to the United States and not get anything in return, and that $1.6 billion, they've decided that it's such a good deal for Australia that we'll send money to the UK as well and not get anything in return for those submarines either.
As someone said on one of the social media sites, 800 million here, 800 million there, suddenly you're dealing with real money. And they're throwing the money away. Now, 1.6 billion into health, Labor has done quite well on Medicare, but how much better could it do with that money? Into education, you could fix the tertiary system, and we'd be probably less griping about the excessive pays given to vice chancellors with that money in education. Even into our own defence, we could hopefully get a new defence structure that worked within a modern Australia rather than the current outdated post World War II, Cold War model that we're still working on. And in fact, in many ways, it's still a 19th century imperialism model. How Richard Marles can say there with a straight face that it's a good deal for Australia is one of the more ingenuous phrases of any politician ever. And we had 9 years of a Liberal government with 5 or 6 of those under Tony Abbott and Scott Morrison, men not known for their acceptance of what most people consider truth. Richard Marles hasn't covered himself in glory, and to be honest, neither has the whole government in carrying this on. Both Britain and America are looking at changing the AUKUS deal, but Australia says, no, here, have some more money, go away. It's almost like the Sydney way of getting a building done. Sure, we'll follow the things. All our forms are in that brown paper bag behind your desk. Don't look at it till I've left. Lots of pictures of John Monash. It's just bizarre that we keep on this, and I don't quite understand without getting into bizarre conspiracy theories.
Oh, well, right now it just seems that the US Navy is struggling. It doesn't have the shipbuilding capacity to meet its own defence needs, and let alone exporting nuclear submarines to any of its allies. And defence experts from the United States are pretty much saying the same thing. And it's almost like standover money from US allies to boost America's ailing shipbuilding industry. And if that's not bad enough, we're also going to foot the bill to support the British shipbuilding industry as well. So with the United States, we've already provided that $1.6 billion. I think it was $800 million just a few weeks ago. I'm not sure if it was a celebrity check or FPOS payment or tap and go or whatever it was. And all up, that's going to be a grand total of $4.7 billion in support for their shipbuilding industry. And to me, it's like this weird leasing arrangement where we're going to pay for the shipbuilding yard to build these submarines and then pay for the submarines and maybe not even use these submarines. And it's just absolutely crazy. And under the AUKUS Pillar 1 agreement, Australia is meant to purchase between 3 and 5 Virginia-class submarines starting from 2032, so that's 7 years away, or less than 7 years away. But US law prohibits the sale of these submarines to foreign nations that they build if that weakens the strength of the US naval fleet. And they will decide whether that's the case or not. So we'll be paying for the building of the shipyards, we'll be paying for the submarines, and whether we get to use them or not is up to the United States. And as Malcolm Turnbull keeps saying, it just has to be the worst deal that Australia has ever engaged in, not just with the United States, but with anyone in the world in our history.
I suspect in the future that it will be erroneously credited to Donald Trump, this deal, because it's such a bad deal. But it's a great deal if you're American. Joe Biden, it was the Biden administration that saw Scott Morrison coming. And of course, Labor will be blamed for this deal too, which is why they should have dumped it. Biden and his cabinet saw Scott Morrison coming a mile away, remembered P.T. Barnum's dictum of there's a sucker born every minute, and the minute they were referring to was Scott Morrison's. And
then they saw Richard Marles coming over too.
When Morrison loses, they must have thought, oh, now we're going to have to deal with someone of substance. Oh, Richard Marles, come in, sit down. Thank you, God. Just as they're about to paraphrase Kerry Packer, you only get one Alan Bond in your lifetime. You only get one Scott Morrison in your lifetime. Seems like you get a Scott Morrison and a Richard Marles. And it's just insanely ridiculous. I note but we might build some in South Australia. That's not going to happen, is it? Because they're not going to get built.
Well, I think there was also a promise to build some of those in Western Australia as well.
Yeah. It's not going to happen either way. It's just it will shut people up for a bit. Oh, there's jobs coming, and each job in a shipyard is worth 100 jobs outside, is it? Are there figures for this? It's not like the school halls where there was a long-term benefit. Once the ships are built, then what? Because we're not continually building them. I don't think it'll be like the old Garden Island in Sydney, which was a continual hub of activity. I think it'll be like 3 or 4 years of activity and then it'll die because, one, they're too expensive. Two, we've got the pesky nuclear-free zones in various inner city suburbs of Sydney and Melbourne in particular. And I think Adelaide has some. And that's going to create issues. And I think we're going to find that the ships aren't going to be built here anyway. At the last moment, they'll be pulled.
Well, also, the whole thing just seems very dodgy, David. And so far, there's just been a lot of unclear promises that keep chopping and changing. And this new treaty with the UK will get some submarines apparently in the late 2030s, and supposedly with some local shipbuilding, we might get some submarines in the 2040s. Who knows? It could be dragged out to the 2050s, and we're getting some submarines built for us in the US, and we'll probably never get to use those anyway. And a lot of this so far is so far in the future, and we don't know what the full arrangements of what is being proposed in any of this. And Richard Marles has said that the full details of the treaty with the UK will be released to Parliament next week, and we'll just have to wait and see whether that happens, and if it does happen, what sort of details are in there. But the cost of $368 billion over the next 30 years, and maybe even a lot more with this new UK deal attached to it, or the UK treaty, it's just really unclear what we're actually getting for all of this. And that's been the criticism with AUKUS ever since it was set up in 2021. And we might get some kind of military capability in 15 or 20 years' time, or even beyond that. Or maybe we won't. And in 20 or 30 years' time, the world will be a lot different compared to today. And the military needs might be quite substantially different as well. The military technology needed might be quite different at that stage. So we talked about it before, but thank you, Scott Morrison, for creating Australia's worst ever deal. He was the one who set up this deal in 2021. Thank you, Richard Marles, for continuing with Australia's worst ever deal and now making it even worse.
It's insane. And I was just thinking, by the time these are done, a lot of the crew isn't even born yet. Like, you join the Navy at 18, couple of years of training, 2026. If they're in service by 2043, we've got a lot of the sailors are in nappies at the moment. It's just insane.
Well, we might have to introduce some Navy expertise into early childhood education. That would solve all of the problems.
Yes, so what does ALI mean? Port and starboard, children. Well done. Fire, open fire. Push the red button. Yeah, it's insane. Long-term planning is good, but this isn't long-term planning. This is short-term planning spread out into the long term. And when the inevitable Royal Commission happens, if they don't make it a whitewash, there's going to be a lot of very senior people in a lot of deep trouble.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
There were quite a few things going on in the second week of Parliament, but it seems that both the government and the opposition are getting into their predictable behaviours. The government is just getting on with governing, and the opposition is getting on with opposing. And for the coalition, old habits are just a bit too hard to shake off, and we had the National Party still railing against the net zero emissions target, with Barnaby Joyce introducing a private member's bill to scrap Australia's commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. And it's just another example of the coalition still not getting it. The Liberal Party in South Australia has rejected the net zero targets. The Western Australian branch is just about to ditch net zero targets as well, along with the promise to reduce welcome to country ceremonies. And just a reminder to our audience and to everyone out there, the coalition comprehensively lost the 2025 federal election. No one cares about changing the net zero by 2050 commitments. No one cares about reducing welcome to country ceremonies. It wasn't a vote winner for them at the 2025 federal election, and it's unlikely to be a vote winner in future elections. And last time I looked, David, it was still 94 seats to the Labor Party and 43 seats to the coalition. And that's not going to change for maybe about 3 years. And if they want to be more like One Nation, the Liberal Party, well, that's a downward spiral towards oblivion. And that's what all of this stuff is. It's sort of right-wing, extreme right-wing or far right-wing stuff that One Nation likes to talk about. And the Liberal Party, well, they might be slow learners at the moment, because continuing with this sort of stuff will just ensure that they keep going on that downward spiral pretty much forever.
They could well be in terminal decline. When you look at those that are standing up and speaking on their behalf, a moribund collection of deadbeats, really. You have promising, let's be fair, they're starting to walk away from certain Pete and Dutton era policies. They've softened their stance on immigration a bit. Now we can argue as to why they did that. Perhaps, hold on, there's all these people out there we can exploit and tax high and pay low. Nonetheless, they have started to walk away from that. It'll be interesting to see what other stuff that they walk away from. But there's that noisy rump on the far right who won't shut up, who won't go away. And I suppose if I'm being really fair, it's not only on the far right of the party, by the way. You have others sticking their heads up where their heads really aren't wanted, and it doesn't bode well for the future of the party.
Well, it just seems like there is this continuing schism within the coalition, and just when you feel like they're starting to read the room, and as you mentioned, David, they did walk back some of those hardline positions of Peter Dutton, and they've always said no in the past to pretty much everything, but at least now they're starting to say yes on some of those things. But just when they might be learning from those lessons, or you think that they might be learning some of those lessons from the 2025 election defeat, well, they go back to the issues that made them lose that election. And Tim Wilson, as far as I can tell at the moment, he's not doing much to help out. He's going to be insufferable over the next few years because he can always say to the Liberal Party, well, look, I wasn't in Parliament when you guys caused that catastrophic loss, and now I'm back here to save the day. Just follow me. I know what to do. But it's that, and it's mainly on the superannuation stuff that he's been throwing the bombs, but it's that bomb-throwing student politics process that I think the electorate thoroughly rejected at the last election. And I realise it's just 3 months since they lost that election, and they're still trying to define themselves in this post-Peter Dutton world, but having people going in different directions within the party is just not going to be a recipe for any kind of political success, I don't think.
No, it's not. And Wilson, of course, was one of the more odious members of Parliament. He should have been sacked after the whole prayer room controversy and not pre-selected ever again. He should have been stripped of his membership of the party. It goes against the party's core values, that type of thing. And he only won by 170 votes. He won through dubious campaigning practices. He's not going to win the next one because he's already showing himself to be not terribly representative of the people of Goldstein. So he's going to get comprehensively hammered out if Zoe Daniels runs again, or if they find an independent of similar calibre and appeal, if Zoe decides she doesn't want to run. Nobody in the party, apart from Tim Wilson, has stood up and said Tim Wilson is the future. Now, to continue being fair, he's only really started this campaign and hasn't won anyone over yet. It'll be interesting to see if he does win anybody over.
The government did have some good news during the week with the inflation rate coming down, and at the end of the June quarter, it was running at 2.1%, which means that there's likely to be an interest rate cut at the next Reserve Bank board meeting. Here's the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
The numbers that we got yesterday were better than expected and better than forecast. And what they showed is that we are making really sustained, substantial progress in the fight against inflation. I'll leave the decisions on interest rates to the independent Reserve Bank. They can make that decision without kind of free advice or predictions from me. My job is to focus on our three goals, which is inflation down, wages up, unemployment low. And Australians together have made very encouraging progress on all three fronts, especially in that inflation data that we got yesterday.
So that's all good news, but there's not so good news for the aged care sector. And there's been a delay in the reforms that the government promised to introduce about 2 years ago. And because of these delays, more people that need a place at an aged care home will have to stay at home or in hospital for longer. And as a result, there's been a call to add 20,000 home care packages while these people are waiting. And the government has actually rejected this approach. And now there'll be a Senate inquiry, which means further delays. And in a similar way to the early education sector, which is in quite a bit of a funding mess, the same applies to the aged care sector. And a lot of this relates to the way that the private sector is involved in the provision of social and human services. But Aside from all of that, the government just needs to do much better in these areas. Sending this off to a Senate inquiry might put a delay in place, but the problems are not going to go away.
No, it's another area that they've underperformed. And it's, again, one of those areas where I struggle to see why they've let this happen, because we're all going to get old. And if we're not getting old, it's for terribly tragic reasons. And so to laugh at old people, to deprive the elderly of care, seems to me to be shooting yourselves in the foot, because once you get to that stage, surely you'd want to be treated with a modicum of dignity, decency, care and respect. It doesn't seem like these people do. And again, there is a sense in if you have money, you're okay. Now, and that's, I'm not going to knock self-funded retirees. I'm not going to knock people who have been fortunate enough to not need government help in this. But for those people who haven't had that fortune, haven't had those opportunities to be able to set themselves up like that, you'd think that we'd want a decent, so that people can live out their last years as long as possible, as healthily as possible, and as comfortable as possible. It's just a strange way of approaching a policy that's going to affect us all. Cancer doesn't affect everybody directly. It affects everybody indirectly, but not everybody directly. Alzheimer's doesn't affect everybody directly. Multiple sclerosis. And these are all important. I could go on forever on various things. The only people age doesn't affect are those who don't get to an old age. We'd like, of course, everybody to get to an old age. We have, again, this policy of kicking into the infirm, the sick, the weak, the poor. They should open the 20,000 spaces. It will help a bit, probably won't fix the problem, but at least alleviate the problem. And they should look at maybe more. If only there was a couple of $1 billion going to a useless cause that we could grab back.
And I've got no idea what that could be, David.
Maybe if we looked at the budget more closely, we could find it.
There has been more movement on Palestine this week, and this is in response to the ongoing humanitarian crisis that is going on in Gaza. And Australia has signed a new joint statement with 15 foreign ministers, including France and Canada, expressing their unwavering commitment to a two-state solution. And whatever form a two-state solution is arrived at, that means a state of Israel and a state of Palestine. But there's a lot of duplicity about that. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said on the weekend that there's no move for Australia to recognise the state of Palestine, even though he's got this unwavering commitment to a two-state solution. Well, doesn't sound like much of an unwavering commitment at all. But there's always these conditions that are attached. Albanese has said that Hamas has to be completely removed before any form of recognition is granted. And what does that actually mean? No one really knows. He's also now saying that other countries in the Middle East also have to recognise Israel before Palestine can be given statehood. Again, well, what's that got to do with Palestine? And Britain has also said that it will recognise Palestine if Israel doesn't implement a ceasefire. So carrot and stick approach, I guess, there. Or stick and carrot. Different countries have said that they will only recognise Palestine if all of the hostages are released, even though when Hamas has released hostages in the past, Israel has gone ahead to break ceasefires and kill even more civilians. But aside from all of that, there is a lot of momentum at the moment, and a lot of this is now in response to the mass starvation inflicted by Israel. And it was the one photo of Mohammed Zakaria, the 18-month-old boy whose emaciated body was held by his mother in Gaza City. And that's a photo that has sickened political leaders into taking some action, or at least some more talking anyway, on Palestine and Gaza. Here's what the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, had to say on the weekend.
We need to make sure that people who are innocent, including the young boy who people will have seen that image of, just breaks your heart. A 1-year-old boy is not a Hamas fighter. Clearly, it is a breach of international law to stop food being delivered, which was a decision that Israel made in March. I'm not a lawyer. Those things will play out their course. But I tell you what it's a breach of. It's a breach of decent humanity and of morality. And everyone can see that. I'm a supporter of Israel and Israel's right to defend itself. But that boy isn't challenging Israel's right to existence, and nor are the many who continue to suffer from the unavailability of food and water.
And very predictably, Israel came out to say that Albanese was a liar and there is no famine or starvation in Gaza, even though everyone in the rest of the world can see exactly what's going on. And the point is, David, that it shouldn't take the photograph of an emaciated boy or footage of starving children to stop a war and an ongoing genocide. It should have never even got to this stage. And as soon as it became obvious what Israel was doing in Gaza, there was ethnic cleansing, expulsions, crimes against humanity, mass murder, as well as trying to implement its actions for a greater Israel, the world should have spoken out and acted then. And the world community, including Anthony Albanese, is still dithering about this. It's reached a point where the world cannot turn back now, but what happens from here on will define what sort of world community we live in.
We've reached that crossroads. We either normalise genocide and say it's okay, running the risk of genocides happening in our own country because they've been normalised, or we take a stand. Now, Britain and Australia are starting to move in the right direction, but it's not far enough. George Bernard Shaw, the great Anglo-Irish playwright and writer, when asked on the Irish question, said, the Irish may well be the very worst people to run a country, but it's their country to run. And I think that's true of everyone, whether it's Tibet, whether it's Palestine, whether it's Russia. I suppose really we're at that point where they might need international intervention to stop Israel, because each time the pressure goes on Israel, well, at least on the Netanyahu government, they ramp up the hostilities. Reports of people being shot at and bombed while they're waiting for food, being told to go to this area where food will be handed out and then they're open fire on. It's just appalling. The heartbreaking, and it's notable, I guess, that it took the famine to actually get left-leaning governments like the British government, like the Australian government, to start to say, maybe we should start to stand up a bit. The optimist in me hopes that this is the start of a process and they're just taking diplomatic steps, and that within the next few weeks there'll be utter and outright condemnation and the Netanyahu government will be declared invalid, or even Israel declared a rogue state while Netanyahu's in there.
Oh, and I think, David, that you are right that we have reached this tipping point that's becoming impossible to ignore. And it's a wide range of parliaments, it's a wide range of leaders, it's across different countries, different jurisdictions. And I think that this is all starting to change quite rapidly as well. And locally, the momentum is building. During the week, we had the Senator David Pocock calling for the recognition of Palestine as a state, independents such as Sophie Scompes and Kate Chaney, Labor MPs such as Ed Husic, and we also had the Labor Friends of Palestine in Victoria calling for the recognition. Unions and churches, they're all coming out with the same message: recognise Palestine now. And for a long time, the narrative has always been about condemning Hamas, and the world is finally realising that Israel needs to be held accountable, and it's time to start condemning the state of Israel as well for its actions. And people don't need to be experts in geopolitics to realise that Israel has gone far too far. Most of the world is just saying, well, enough is enough. And if recognition of the state of Palestine does occur, and I'm still highly sceptical about this happening, because the United States has to also be on board with all of this, and I can't see them doing any of this at this stage. But even if it does come to that stage, well, this is just the beginning, because we've got all of those questions about who's going to enforce the peace, and what about the borders and rights of Palestinians who have lived under occupation for almost 80 years, and all of those settlers living illegally in the West Bank. I can't imagine them going away quietly. But whatever the case is, all of this just has to be resolved through international law, not some weird kind of biblical law or political law or the law of might and the military or whatever the case might be. And that's the process that got us into this mess in the first place. But the tide is definitely turning, and the humanitarian disaster and the genocide has to stop. And there's absolutely no question about it. It just has to stop.
Yep. They've gone too far. It's unforgivable, really, what's happened. Netanyahu not only has to face internal Israeli justice, which he is up for, and that won't be good for him. He also has to face world justice. He has to be seen at The Hague. I know that there are people listening to us today who think that Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong should also face The Hague. Keir Starmer should face The Hague. Van der Leyen in Germany should face The Hague, all for supporting, and Trump, of course, and Biden, all, of course, for supporting the genocide. That's a question that we might put off to another week when we have more time. But certainly, I think there's an argument there. Whether it's an argument that can be sustained is another thing, but I do think that it's worth discussing at some point.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
And in a related matter, after months of denying it, Foreign Minister Penny Wong has finally admitted that Australia has been supplying parts for F-35 fighter jets in Israel. And these are the same jets used by Israel in its bombing campaign in Gaza and using those planes to kill thousands of citizens in Gaza. Here's Senator Wong in the Senate during the week.
I think everyone watching this will see that the Australian Greens political party are desperate to try and play domestic politics with this dreadful conflict. And, shame on you. Shame on you. I have explained to you multiple times, and yet despite that you continue to spread misinformation. We are part of the long-standing F-35 consortium. It is essential to our sovereign defence capability and the F-35. As part of the global F-35 supply chain, we contribute components and parts that are non-lethal in nature.
So, David, we supplied all the parts to create the jets that dropped the bombs on civilians, but we didn't drop the bombs. So everything is okay. Everything's good in the world. There's no problem at all.
I supplied the trigger guards to the guns that were used in a massacre, but the trigger guards actually stopped the trigger being pulled. So I'm not responsible.
Well, I'm letting you off the hook there. That's all fine.
It was the non-lethal part.
Excellent. And it's a little bit like John Howard's core and non-core promises. Now we have lethal and non-lethal parts, and to me, it's just so disingenuous. If Penny Wong had some more credibility, she would have admitted this in the first place, and instead of denying the link at all, denying that the 52 military export licenses to Israel had nothing to do with military activity, refusing to tell us the value of these export military licenses, and totally denying that Australia was supplying parts for the Israeli F-35 fighter jets. And it's the duplicity of the worst kind. And I know that politics is, well, that's what politics is. It's duplicity, 2 standards, 3 standards, even more. But the truth always comes out in politics, Dave. And it might take some time for that truth to come out, but it does always come out. Stop bullshitting the public and let the public decide whether what you're doing is right or wrong. And we can tell that what Penny Wong has been doing all along is absolutely wrong.
I note there's been calls for her resignation. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But for a foreign minister to be in this position, and a foreign minister who was seen as a serious contender as foreign minister, occasionally you get reshuffles, and Michaelia Cash is the shadow foreign minister at the moment. I don't know that would last in a sensible Liberal government. Bob Carr got a criminally short time as foreign minister, but only because he was installed at the very end of the Labor government, which was a terrible shame. He would have been one of Australia's best foreign ministers over the long term, and it's a shame to see that Gareth Evans got 12 years and Alexander Downer got 12 or 14 years or something. And between the two of them, I vastly prefer Gareth Evans, don't get me wrong. And Bob Carr only gets 8 or 9 months. And I'm not a Bob Carr fanboy, I just like competent people doing jobs that their competencies are suited for. Penny Wong has profoundly disappointed. And I hate saying that. I'd love to be able to stand up here and say, oh, look, she's one of Australia's very best foreign ministers. While she has supported a genocide and lied to the public about what Australia is supplying to that, I'm not sure her position is tenable. Others may disagree, of course.
We've also had an unusual question about how to remove a politician who ends up in jail, and we had this issue in New South Wales arising with the independent member Gareth Ward, who was recently convicted of indecent assault, sexual intercourse without consent and common assault. And he was previously a minister in the New South Wales Liberal government, decided to run as an independent at the last state election when he was forced to resign from the Liberal Party. And even though he had these allegations hovering around him, and in one of the more bizarre moments in electoral history, he managed to win the seat at the 2023 New South Wales state election. So there is this idea that the relationship between the electorate and the politician is sacrosanct, and the only people who can remove a politician is the electorate itself, and that's always going to be at an election or a by-election. But this is something that will have to change. In New South Wales, a politician who commits an infamous crime that results in a jail term of 5 years can be expelled from Parliament. So the words are can be expelled, doesn't necessarily mean that they will be expelled, and that's also pending an appeal. But what if they end up doing this infamous crime and they only get 3 years in jail? What happens then? You can't be a sitting member of Parliament and also be sitting in jail. Well, it looks like you can, but practically how would you do that? And that's a law that does need to be changed. It's a lot clearer in federal politics. A jail term of more than 1 year will result in expulsion, but even that's not good enough.
I think the two entities that should be able to remove a politician is the public, yes, definitely, and themselves. Now, they can be voluntary, of course. They've got sick, they've gotten too old, they've decided that politics isn't for them and have decided to pursue other opportunities, or less positively, they've committed a heinous act or crime.
Infamous
or an illegal act or crime, and hence remove themselves from eligibility. Now, while they're under investigation, you step aside, you don't lose your job because we are innocent until proven guilty. That is as it should be, but you shouldn't be in Parliament where you might be able to set up a sneaky vote where you can have yourself removed from the investigation, for example. So you step aside, Parliament's not allowed to comment on it till it's done. If it turns out you're innocent, welcome back, all forgotten, we're all friends now. If it's not, then your contract as a member of Parliament has been breached, and hence Parliament can terminate your employment. And it becomes difficult. Pauline Hanson, of course, went to jail for 6 months, I think. Now, she wasn't in Parliament at the time. She spent 6 months in jail or 8 months in jail or something, and the minimum time that disqualified you from Parliament was 8 months. Or was 12 months, I'm sorry. This is fair because I don't think it's fair that if you've been arrested for protesting, for example, and you haven't hurt anybody, I don't think that should disqualify you from Parliament. We have to look at what crimes will get you disqualified. Anything that actually helps the democratic process, even if the government doesn't like it, that doesn't hurt anyone, like protesting, like writing seditious letters, but not treason, probably shouldn't get you barred from Parliament, and they probably shouldn't get you sent to jail. To be brutally frank, it's clear that Gareth Ward is not fit for Parliament. He's been found guilty, yes. These aren't up against the court. He's going to jail, isn't he?
Oh, yes, he is, yeah. I don't think he's received the full sentence yet, but he has been convicted and he's likely to receive a jail term of over 5 years. Now, we don't want to preempt anything, but that's the likely outcome in this situation. So whether if he ends up being sent to jail for 4 years, I'm not sure what's going to happen there because it's still an infamous crime, but it's under the threshold of 5 years. So who knows what will happen there.
Old Lemonade Lay, who kept winning seats because he'd murder his opponents, ended up in Broadmoor in England.
Well, hopefully we won't get to that point, but like Lemonade Lay, politics is filled with a lot of unsavoury characters. We had those domestic violence issues for Mark Latham from the New South Wales Parliament relating to his former partner, and his behaviour has been pretty diabolical since he lost the federal election as Labor leader all the way back in 2004. Mark Latham has gone all right-wing, he's anti-woke. He was trolling the anti-DV campaigner Rosie Batty on social media all those years ago, and I don't think that he's a fit person for Parliament. And Parliament does have some pretty odious characters in there. But the point is that as bad as these people are, if you put your name up for an election, well, there's every chance that you'll get into office. And that's what happened with Mark Latham. And that's the nature of democracy. We can't ban people just because we don't like them. We can't do that before they get into Parliament, but we should be able to remove them for these so-called infamous crimes once they are in Parliament. That's the thing that needs to change, I think.
A friend of mine has done a little bit of work with Mark Latham in his role within the New South Wales Public Service. And I texted him to say, did you hear about Mark Latham? And he texted back, said, couldn't have happened to a nicer bloke, shouldn't have happened to a nicer bloke, which I thought pretty much summed it up. And Latham, of course, rorted the system by resigning and then getting himself reappointed so that he snuck in an extra term. That type of thing shouldn't be allowed. I think it undermines the sensible nature of upper house replacements, that if you lose a colleague for whatever reason, somebody else goes in. You can't just keep resigning and avoiding elections like that. That totally undermines the democratic. And when you look at Latham's pre-2004 work, he's very much in favour of democracy and making sure democracy works and making sure that all sections of society are represented.
Well, he also wrote Civilising Global Capital, and it's an unpopular thing to say right now, but that was actually quite an excellent book. But that was written a long, long time ago, and he's gone off the rails since that time.
He was a bright future of the Labor Party that I guess is a warning lesson for everyone there. We could spend all day speculating about Mark Latham, but there are plenty of better people to talk about.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.